好，那我们开始了。尊敬的各位嘉宾老师，亲爱的
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. This is the China Dialogue 6 for the UNFSS. I am the Food Policy Officer, Mr. Ouyang Huiyu from the Good Food Fund. The UNFSS will be convened by Secretary General this September during the UNGA. It will be the biggest summit this year, which aims to launch bold new action to promote the 17 SDGs. President Xi Jinping emphasized the need to transform the food system. It also voices support for China to hold the UNFSS. This is a solution summit and also a summit to win the pledge by head of state. It gathers the best practices from all walks of life. The Good Food Fund is a leader in promoting health and sustainable food system transformation. We have participated in every process of the preparation for the summit. We also launched the China Action Hub, which aims to engage all sectors in China to contribute Chinese wisdom and approaches to this international summit. Since its foundation in February, China Action Hub has launched 5 China dialogues covering school food, rural vitalization, youth participation, food education, and plant-based food promotion. Last Tuesday, we also held the SME China dialogue. These dialogues have motivated policymakers, the academic community, business community, and young people. Through the official feedback mechanism, they have made great contributions to the solutions, which have responded to the call of President Xi Jinping to improve our capacity for engaging in international communication. We have 5 action tracks for the UNFSS, which aims to solve the multiple challenges facing our food production and consumption. So what is the goal for each action track? The theme for this dialogue.
今天这期中国说对话的主题是
The theme of today's dialogue is the potential of the wet market in changing the urban food environment. It is highly relevant to the goal of each action track. Now I will play the videos of the lead of these action tracks. And after that, Mr. Liu Yu, Program Officer from the Good Food Fund, will talk about the wet market program. He will also talk about the wet market guidebook compiled by the Good Food Fund and Slow Food China.
Hi, everybody. Greetings from Oslo, Norway. My name is Olav Kjørven, and I am Senior Director for Strategy with EAT. Lead one of the 5 action tracks towards the UN Food Systems Summit later this year. The action track focused on shifting to sustainable and healthy food consumption patterns.
My name is Anouk de Vries, and I work with the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition as the project manager for Action Track 1. Action Track 1 ensures access to safe and nutritious food for all.
Dear colleagues and friends, my name is Nigel Brett. I'm the Director of Programs in Asia Pacific Division at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. IFAD has been designated the UN anchor agency for Action Track 4, Advancing Equitable Livelihoods and Value Distribution.
My name is Bing Zhao, and I am the Director of Food Systems and Smallholder Support at the headquarters of the World Food Programme as the anchor agency of Action Track 5, dealing with building resilience to vulnerabilities, stresses, and shocks.
One really exciting area that we are focusing on is the food environments that we encounter in our cities and in our neighborhoods around the world. Can we easily access a rich variety of sustainably produced, healthy, and safe foods in our communities? Or are people being inundated with cheap but harmful products, often aggressively marketed? Or are we running big risks, even of pandemics, because of dangerous and unsustainable practices in places where food is sold? And how are we treating animals, our fellow living beings?
Wet markets continue to be a place where a lot of fresh produce is offered, such as fruits, vegetables, but also animal-sourced foods.
WFP recognizes the importance of local supply chains in providing local communities access to nutritious, diversified, and affordable food supplies. Meanwhile, these local supply chains and markets are vital to the livelihoods of millions of smallholder farmers and other small actors along food value chains.
Food safety is key on wet markets, and it is something that is very much discussed in our action track. One of the things we're working on is developing a food safety toolkit to support food safety in more informal settings. And public health, and also looking at what the local possibilities are really at the core of this initiative. Also, many of the businesses that are working on wet markets and are selling on wet markets are small and medium enterprises. And we know that these are essential in providing foods in low and middle income countries and for people on lower incomes. So SMEs are really at the top of the agenda across the Food System Summit, not just in Action Track 1, but also in other action tracks. In Action Track 1, we are looking at improving the financing facility for SMEs. And we're also supporting the idea of a virtual hub that provides SMEs with easier access to information on research and development for nutritious foods, so that it will become easier for them to bring these nutritious foods to wet markets.
IFAD is committed to investing in improving rural markets. Between 2016 and 2018, IFAD investments enabled 62 million people to achieve positive economic mobility and 50 million people to access food markets. By leveraging IFAD's comparative advantage on sustainable rural transformation, we look forward to work jointly with you to deliver greater development impact for the rural poor.
Did you know that the decisions we make every day about the food we buy and eat are the most important decisions that we can make as individuals and households when it comes to our own health? And not only that, but also the health of the entire planet. We are working to generate new solutions and build strong coalitions that can drive a transformation of our food environments around the world. I believe that the amazingly rich tradition in China of wet markets offers a fantastic arena for showing what a transition to sustainable, healthy, and safe food environments can actually look like in practice. A transition that would amaze and inspire the entire world. Success will require looking at both the supply and the demand side. Authorities will need to set and enforce clear standards, such as China is already doing when it comes to food loss and waste. But companies and entrepreneurs would also need to act collaboratively, and consumers need to be informed, to know if products have been sustainably sourced, for example, and why that matters.
Hello guys, I am Liu Yu, Food Policy Officer from the Gufu Fund. First, I want to thank you for your support and your attention and contribution to the wet markets. In the past few months, I have been working with my colleagues at the Gufu Fund to finish this wet market guidebook, laying this solid foundation for the implementation of the wet market programs at the second half of this year. First, I want to share some of my personal experiences and perhaps the experiences of others. To talk a little bit about why we need such a guidebook. When I was a kid, one of my favorite things was to go to the wet market with my grandma because of the bustle and hustle there. We could bargain with the vendors, we could buy vegetables and fruits. But now I am living in South America. I like visiting the wet market just like usual. But apart from the socializing scenarios and the vegetables, I can also buy the fresh and quality ingredients at half of the price of the supermarkets. And then I realized that in countries where there is a high poverty rates, fresh ingredients, the wet market is an important source of fresh ingredients. This makes me realize that the wet market has huge potential to transform the food system to promote ecological sustainability and equitable livelihood. It can also promote the 5 action tracks under the UNFSS and transform the food system as a whole. So we come up with the philosophy for the wet markets. So 3 words: well-being, ecological sustainability, and transformation, which underscore the important role of the wet market in transforming the whole food system at the end of food retail. We hope that this guidebook could be one that everyone can understand, can use, and can take part in to build the wet markets. And the philosophies of the stakeholders to build the wet markets can also be seen in the whole book. The guidebook starts with what is a food system, and then it moves on to talk about the position of the wet market in the food system, some of the challenges facing it, and the potential of it in transforming the food system. We also come up with the concept of the wet markets. We talk about functions, management model, and business model. We come up with specific renovation projects or programs, solutions for the wet markets. We advocate that every wet market should align themselves with local conditions and resources. At the end, we also provide a toolkit for all the wet markets to rebuild themselves in light of local resources and conditions. We will publish the abstracts for this guidebook, and then we will publish the whole book later. We will revise the guidebook in light of the implementation of this guidebook and program. We hope to integrate more ideas into this guidebook. So we welcome you to download this guidebook, and we welcome any suggestion. In the end, I want to say thank you to all of you on behalf of the Good Food Fund, and also to the wet market global expert community for their expertise and suggestions for this guidebook. Thank you very much. Thank you, Liu Yu. This guidebook has pulled the wisdoms of experts at home and abroad. It is based on the best practices across the globe. It provides insights and guidance for the development of the wet market in China. Next, we will take a look at global cases. I will give the floor to Mr. Richard McKenzie, board member of Slow Food International, Stephen Davis, co-founder of Project for Public Spaces, and Madame Zhenting Ha, Livable Cities Project Manager, to talk about the wet markets in the US and Southeast Asia.
下方可以选择传译的中文频道。Richard, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Hugh. And let me share my screen. Slideshow. Aha. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you so much for including me in this important conversation. That is indeed, as the presentation that started things off, illustrated how cross-cutting the issue of wet markets is when you think of the various action tracks. And I am a 25-year-long public market practitioner. And so much of what is being discussed today is like the work that I am doing with FAO, with the FAO office in Dhaka, Bangladesh, where we are looking at ways to renovate and transform wet markets. What I'd like to discuss with you this morning, and my colleagues who will follow me will go into far greater detail. I will try and keep things very conceptual and simple to help us think about wet markets differently, and also to think about how we manage wet markets. We are part of Slow Food, Health Bridge Canada, and the Project for Public Spaces are part of a global rethinking of public markets in a municipal ecosystem approach, so that they are both very simple and very complex at the same time. Now, a wet market is a public market. And the public market is the term that is used throughout the world to describe a very particular type of institution, an ancient institution that is still here and is also being revived and hopefully also transformed. Now, you will find public markets, a wet market, under a shed in the outside. You can also find it indoors in a market hall, and you can find it out in the open air, like a street market. These are all public markets. These can all be wet markets. The one place where one kind of market that we are increasingly aware of is the supermarket. Now, a supermarket is not a public market for this very, very important reason. Whereas a supermarket will centralize all of the goods under one company and send the shopper through one pay turnstile, the beauty and magic and deliciously complicated aspect to the public market is that there are many checkout turnstiles. You pay and have a social and commercial transaction with each vendor in the market. As a result, the market is an extraordinary platform for learning because of these many transactions. So in this regard, a wet market is a place to sell food, but especially if it is managed professionally and thoughtfully with a very clear purpose, a wet market can be so much more than that. But in order to achieve that goal, to achieve that purpose, it needs three things. It needs roots, sunlight, and care. In this regard, I want you to think about a wet market as like a flower. So the roots, that's good infrastructure. It needs to be clean. It needs to be well maintained. The sunlight, you need good rules, clear transparency, so that everyone operates under the same fair rules. And it needs good care, much like a flower. And the care is good management. Often this is one of the missing components of successful markets. So if you think of it as like a flower, think of this in terms of a theory of change. When we preserve historic structures and make public spaces safe, we create the conditions by which you attract the public, you provide useful services, and you animate the public space, so that what we end up doing is enabling to create a public space where people feel that they belong, where vendors earn money with dignity, and that people and businesses flourish. This is in the public market world often described as the triple bottom line. Now, when we do that, we do all of those things. This results in the public market serving the public good. This is a theory of change, of thinking about the market as more than just a place for food access, but actually a platform for learning, a platform for social interaction, for social cohesion. All of this contributes to the public good. Now, that is one theory of change that is used in a number of different settings. I think that the wet market, well-being, ecology, and transformation is another theory of change, a very good theory of change. But to have a theory is one piece of the puzzle. The other piece is what do you do with it? How do you act on it? And this asks a lot of a market, usually to operate with very limited resources, of acting on the theory of change. And in order to act on it, you need to balance some very compelling and competitive elements. In the market world, we refer to these in English as the 4 M's. The mission, which is that theory of change of why, the purpose of why the market is there. The measurement, to have very clear measurable goals that you can define how far towards those goals have you achieved. How you market these ideas, both internally to the vendors, who of course are independent and who have their own agenda, which is to make money and to provide services. And most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, the piece that is often overlooked is how do you manage all of these complex elements towards a singular goal of achieving a public good. Now, if you manage for change. And this is why it is a theory of change. And I think this is where what I hope you see the connection between what I'm describing and that the wet market's goal towards transformation, the opportunity for the market to transform social relations, commercial relations, and relations between urban and rural communities within the market. This takes a very specific type of leadership among the management in the market. It is more than just keeping the vendors in line with a stick. You must also use carrots, the carrots to incentivize change. Now, I have in here a link for an article I'd written for the an essay for the United States farmers markets to really think about markets as centers of incentivizing behavior change. But I think if you look at the relationship between the management and the shoppers, there is an opportunity to use the market for creative programming, where you incentivize shoppers to eat more vegetables, to rally around biodiversity, to share recipes, to eat with the elderly, to create greater intergenerational connections, much as you, Louis, talked about in growing up in the wet markets, to learn how to cook at the market. You can activate and animate the public market, the wet market floor, with programming that rewards this kind of behavior. Now, the behavior change is also possible for the vendors. You can design into the programming of the market, much as what EAT described at the very beginning, the type of programs and competitive grants and financing to reward the vendors to sell more vegetables, to promote biodiversity, to bring in and rally around the traditional recipes, for farmers and for vendors to sell more organic products and to use less plastic. This can be embedded into the management priorities of the market. Now, the good news is that you're not alone. There are many of us working throughout the world who are interested in leveraging these traditional mechanisms of wet markets towards new goals. For instance, Meatless Monday, an important partner who I work with, who Slow Food works with, who the Good Food Fund works with, is looking at ways of developing incentive campaigns that reward shoppers to eat less meat and to rally around more plant-based eating. The great thing about markets is markets are marvelous for promoting the biodiverse plants, vegetables, and fruits that we have in our regions. Similarly, slow food cares about the traditional foods, biodiversity, the dignity of the farmer. You are not alone, because Slow Food Great China is a leader in this particular space, as it is around the world. And then you are not alone, because there is a world of public market practitioners and evangelists and experts who are here to also figure out how can we best leverage these ancient mechanisms of public markets for public good. And with that, I'd like to end here and to introduce my colleague, Stephen Davies, who will be describing in far greater detail how this has been done in other settings like Vietnam. So with that, I will pass the baton on to Stephen Davies. Thank you.
Steve, I think you muted yourself.
Hello?
Or maybe I should have been introducing Ha. Oh, there you go, Steve.
Okay. So, good evening from Hanoi.
No, here, oh, let me bring it up again, sorry. Sorry, the graphics got out of whack here, but again, my name is Stephen Davies. I'm one of the co-founders of Project for Public Spaces, and we've been working in markets for the past 25 years in all different aspects of markets. And I want to introduce my colleague, Hugh Ha from HealthBridge. She is the project manager for HealthBridge, working primarily in all kinds of public spaces, and was the leader for this project with the wet markets that we've been doing for the past 2 years.
Yeah. Good evening from Hanoi. It is a pleasure for me and Steve to talk with you today about our collaboration to create new vision for wet market in Hanoi. And I hope that our story will give some idea to you in your current work to preserve and improve wet markets in China. Let me first provide you with some background information about our city. Hanoi is the capital of Vietnam, a socialist middle-income country with a market-oriented economy. And we have a young population with a desired modern lifestyle. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Hanoi City has a history of over 1,000 years, and markets have always been the central to the city culture and economy. Hanoi even has been considered a city of markets. This is the old photo of Dong Xuân Market, which is the oldest and most famous market in Hanoi. From the past till now, markets have always been considered as the major source that provide affordable, fresh, and nutritious food to urban residents, especially the poor throughout the city. Next slide, please. Yeah, though playing an important role in the city life, public wet markets in Hanoi are facing many challenges. There is a lack of understanding markets' value and why they're worthy of investment. Most of the markets in the city are now in poor conditions, and that causes many food safety issues. Meanwhile, because of the high land value of markets, many investors have attempts to turn markets into shopping malls or office buildings. Also, markets are facing a strong competition, as now there are many shopping choices. from street vendors to supermarkets to online suppliers. Next slide, please. Yeah, and as a public health NGO, HealthBridge cares very much about public wet markets. And we have worked to preserve and improve wet markets in Hanoi since 2011. And I would like to show you a video that will tell you more about our work. Yeah, please.
I'm project manager for Leo Cities. I'm coming to you from Hansa Market in the center of the Hanoi city. At one time, this was a thriving market full of life and energy. But in 2011, the city government introduced a policy that would shut down all markets and replacing with shopping centers. I'd like to show you what this market looks like now. There's no life here. Vendors find it difficult to sell and customers don't want to come here. Instead, many of the vendors have moved out to the street, and this is where customers would like to shopping. But for now, street markets are mostly illegal, and these vendors are not considered informal, and therefore their livelihoods are always at risk. But saving the markets isn't enough. This is Châu Long Market. It's an important market for the city and for this neighborhood. It's a place full of people, but as you can see, it needs renovations. We work with Steve, who is co-founder of PPS, to organize a design workshop with Hanoi Architects Association, and teams of young architects came up with some great design concepts for 3 different markets. As a result of that competition, the national government became more interested in markets, and we are now working with them to develop national policy that will protect and preserve markets into the future.
This is just a sum up of our work. Now Steve will continue with further details of our collaborations to revitalize wet markets in Hanoi. Steve?
Thank you, Ha, and I'm sorry for the technical problems on my end. I would like to just discuss the design workshop in a little bit more detail. Is something we began in the fall of 2018 with Hanoi Architects Association and a design organization called AgoHub. Our goal was to develop new ideas for markets in Hanoi. Architects often have little experience designing markets in Vietnam, and so this was partly a training program and partly a process to stimulate the interest of the public and the government to encourage more investment, which you could see is badly needed. So in terms of Richard's paradigm, we were looking at the roots of the market, the physical infrastructure. Next slide, please. We set, next, please. Back once, please. Yeah, so we set we set these 4 goals that were shown to maintain the authenticity of the markets, to upgrade and modernize them as facilities, to expand business opportunities, and to expand community impact on health, which we have seen as an important issue for markets. We selected 3 markets. Go back, please, to the next one. We selected 3 markets shown here, where the city and the private operators expressed interest in making some initial improvements. They also represent different types of markets that are common in Hanoi. Next slide. Participants were mostly young architects who were very enthusiastic about the potential of the markets. Next slide. Next, please. This is an overview of the process that we went through that took about 4 to 6 weeks. And I'm going to talk about each step in the process. But I think the important thing to emphasize is that, yes, you can analyze markets, how they're functioning. Yes, you can get customer and vendor views about what they feel is important, what do they think is missing. And yes, you can get public attention and gather a lot of support for your project through a kind of open community collaborative process. Next, please. This was the architect orientation workshop, which was one of our first steps. And we asked the architects two questions. What are the qualities of wet markets that should be preserved? You could see that they touched a lot on of the qualities that we've already been mentioned, but they really do have value, and in so many different respects. The next question we asked was, what kinds of changes should be made to wet markets? And the first thing they said, well, we don't want to do harm. We want to preserve the positive qualities of markets. We want to improve cleanliness and fire safety, enhance the flexibility of spaces, make markets more public spaces, and other issues such as that. So these became the kind of focus for it. We also introduced this marketplace audit, and the criteria of the market audit encourages people to think about the markets as a public space. Is it accessible? Is it a comfortable place to be? Are the products displayed well? Is it a place where people can socialize? These were ideas that excited the government officials we later presented to, because they saw that the markets could be more than just places to buy food. Next. Next slide. Design workshop was structured so that each day we addressed one or two aspects of markets and then shared those ideas with everyone. By the end of the week, each team had a complete concept. Next slide. Ha showed some of the ideas that we presented in the market, and there's not time to show all the concepts, so I'll just share a few. Chalong Market was the market Ha presented in her video at the end of the video, the one that wasn't turned into a shopping center. It's located on a lake in a neighborhood where there are not many parks and public spaces. Next slide. The architects proposed using the roof of the market for restaurants on the second floor and a park on the third floor with the traditional market on the first floor. Next, please. Naklam Market is a privately operated market that is only about 10 years old, but already in poor condition. The shed roofs did not protect the customers, so tarps were added. Next slide. This concept would transform the design of the sheds and open the market up to the Red River, which is adjacent to the market, make it a much stronger public space. Next slide. The Ha Market is a market that operates a few days a week and also had issues with weather protection. But this image shows, next slide. This image shows a new public space at the heart of the market. Next. Our final presentation was held in the District People's Committee with many public officials attending, and this was very important to our process. Next slide. And thanks to Ha's help, over 25 articles appeared in newspapers and local media, gaining much public attention. Next, please. We're excited that the national government has just announced funding for the renovation of urban markets. Funding was previously available only for rural markets. And as Ha mentioned in her video, the national government is now developing a new policy for markets for the entire country of Vietnam, which is another positive outcome. Next. Thank you for your invitation and the opportunity to share our experiences.
好，谢谢 Steve、Ha 还有 Richard 精彩分
Thank
享。
you very much, Richard, Steve, and Ha, for your wonderful presentations. Both in urban spaces and the social structure, wet markets are a very key factor. I studied architecture and planning, and now my work is related to food systems and public good. I feel that your ideas resonate with me a lot. And if any of the audience has any question or comments, please leave them in the chat box, and we will have a Q&A section later. Now let's give the floor to Betty Kibara, Director at the Rockefeller Foundation, Africa Region Office, to share her experience on building smart African food markets for the future. Welcome.
Right, I hope everyone can see my screen. My name is Betty Kibara. I'm a director at the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm going to be, I had just the other presentation about a wet market is like a flower. And today I'm going to be talking about smart markets of the future. So where did this come from? When last year, when we all went through the COVID pandemic, the government of Kenya, of course, issued protocols on how we needed to social distance at the market and ensure sanitation. I love shopping at the wet markets in Kenya because the prices are lower and you get to negotiate with the women at the market, interact with them. And one of those days I went to one of the markets and I found they had a water tank, but they didn't have water in it. And then the place was muddy and not looking so good with poor sanitation. So in light of COVID, I also started thinking, why can't we design a smart markets for the future? And I will describe what I had in the vision I had in my mind. And I did do a publication in one of the local newspapers. And long story cut short, the Rockefeller Foundation decided to give some funds to the Eastern African Grain Council, which is a regional association that supports harmonization of trade policies, and they also do a lot of work in the East African region developing the grain market. And so with the funding to EAGC, we had just a vision of what the smart markets of the future would look like. And the picture you see on your left there is the idea that we had about the smart markets. And just before I can come to how smart the market can be, on your left is one picture that I've shared with you. That maybe could be an extreme, but some of the markets in Africa or even in Kenya, it's not uncommon for you to find, for example, waste is not collected on time. So in some cases, you can even stay for a couple of weeks in the marketplace. And this is also places which are supposed to be, having and adhering to food safety. But just to give a recap, the open food markets in Africa are a source of food for more than 90% of the population. And while the supermarkets are also important, the market segment only captures about 5 to 10% of the fresh fruits and vegetables. And when we intervene in this market, we're also supporting more than 57% of the vendors who are female. Typically, you find in the African wet markets, you find the largest portion of the product is mainly the fruits and vegetables, with a portion of grains and also some livestock of some kind. And they are very important. The food markets in Kenya, for example, estimated to be $1.5 billion on thereabout. But when you look at some of the market infrastructure, some of them are very old, 30 to 40 years old, in some cases dilapidated and not very well maintained. When you talk about design, not well designed, for example, when it rains, the markets can really get flooded. And also even looking at waste management. In Kenya, we say we have each Kenyan produces about 0.39 kilograms of waste per capita, and here it's organic waste, but sometimes that's not collected on time and is also not being utilized efficiently. We also have high post-harvest losses. We talk about post-harvest losses at the farm level, but when you speak to the traders who are buying large volumes of fruits and vegetables, they're losing more than 40%. And then the issue of sanitation and waste disposal. We have also seen over time, it's not that the markets have not been developed. They have been developed with very, very good intentions. But sometimes, not always, they can tend to be like ghost projects where even some traders may even reject the state-of-art facilities. And so we have also tried to look at why is it that some markets can be built, for example, the vertically built markets, and then you find half of the vendors are actually outside the market instead of being inside the market. So sometimes we have learned that some of those markets can be created in a vacuum, without very, very strong stakeholder involvement and consultation. And I will go a little bit into details on how have we engaged the stakeholders in designing the smart markets. And one of the feedback also we had why the many traders would reject a market is because the store sizes sometimes when the markets are built, they're allocated maybe 1 by 1 meter, and sometimes the wholesalers who need a lot of space. So just having ability to have modular storage has come out as one of the reasons why the traders would reject a market. And then in some cases, when you have to rebuild the market, relocation to a new market, sometimes can also be a pain point to the traders. So that said, as the Rockefeller Foundation, we decided to have a vision of how can we build the next smart market of the future. And just to put it in context, that smart market doesn't exist. We're in the process of designing it. We have finished the design and will be supporting the implementation. So we envisioned a market that has a very good layout. We looked at a market also that taps into solar energy. Africa is endowed with almost 365 days of sunshine. And we all know that the cost of solar power is coming down. Can we tap the solar from the roof? What you see on your left are those solar panels. We envision a market that uses solar panel, and that solar panel the power can be used for food processing, a little bit of food processing, maybe fruits from fruits and juices, and then it can also be used for cold storage solution. And most recently, we also have an idea of tapping into solar energy for e-mobility. We know the e-bikes are becoming, we have made a lot of advancement in e-mobility, and we're also thinking about that. And the solar can also be used for lighting and providing security for the market. The waste management, here I'm talking about organic waste. We do have some program where we are looking at, can we use the market waste, the organic waste, to convert it into a substrate for insect-based feed? So we do have some interesting models that we are looking at on how the waste can be collected and sorted out and used to raise the black soldier fly, which is an insect that can be processed into animal feed to provide protein. The other component of what we feel that smart market should be is access to water. We can harvest water. In Africa, we have maybe rainwater for about 6 months in a year. We can be very, very creative. Instead of being in a market which doesn't have water, we can do the water harvesting. So we're envisioning a market where we're also able to harvest water and the solar and sanitation. And also we think about a market which can be also be digitized, and you can be able to track, for example, how much volume of vegetables and fruits are being consumed sourced from the market. And that can also be able to inform us in terms of providing data on how well we are consuming the more protective foods. So the uniqueness of smart markets is, I think the biggest thing is around the waste management, sanitation facilities, and the water management, and the whole recycling and contributing to the circular economy of the market. That's one of the unique character of the smart markets. And then I know I've talked about this, the solar mini grid, and we are working with Dalberg Consulting, which is trying to look, we're working with Dalberg Consulting to look at the business case for smart markets. And we are also working with PowerGen, which is estimating for us how much power can be sourced from the roof of the market. And I think I've just highlighted there, we can use it for cold storage, for mini processing, some kind of waste management, and just to keep the market spark, and including the digital solution. So successful implementation of smart markets. One of the things, and I know it's been mentioned by the previous speaker, is understanding and researching the human-centered design. Who are those people in the market? What do they want? What the vendors? What are their pain points? What about the consumers? And the many other market players, including the market management. So we have partnered with IDEO.org on the human-centered research that has really been very, very informative. Design is also a very important piece. We have partnered with the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology that has conceptualized all these designs that I've shared with you. And then PowerGen, which is carrying out for us a feasibility assessment on the solar solution, and also Dalberg that is doing the business cases. Markets, African markets, public components and public goods, and they can also have, you need to understand the political economy of markets. So one of the studies that we have done is we've had visited more than 10 markets, and we've really tried to analyze the political economies of market, including who are the key players, where the market dynamics, that as we go in and as we design the next market, the smart markets for the future, then we know the best entry points. Successful implementation of the smart markets. I think for us, because the Rockefeller Foundation is a philanthropic development partner, we don't necessarily implement on the ground. And we also want to make sure that when we bring in philanthropic capital, we are being catalytic. And so with the funds that we are going to be providing, we also want to co-create the market with the government. So we've had to have very strong and strategic partnership with the government, and in particular the State Department for Housing and Urban Development, because at the end of the day, our biggest investment or our biggest outcome from this work would be if the national government can also support the development of a policy around making the market smart and including most of the components that we are suggesting. And that process is ongoing. We'll be coming up with guidelines for smart markets. And because the Kenyan government, we work at different levels, first at the national government, but the markets are actually managed by the county government. And just for information, Kenya is divided into 47 counties. So we have identified some of those counties, and we are getting into some memorandum of understanding so that the cost of the market is split between our funds and also the private sector investment and also the funding from the county government. So far we are going to be, what the market that you see here doesn't exist. It exists in design phase, but we're in the process of having this started. We'll be doing a greenfield project in one region. It's called Naivasha Fish Market, where they also have very close to the source of fish, but it's also going to have other vegetables. But beside us having a greenfield project that is a smart market, we also think that there are some good markets that, for example, World Bank has already put in a lot of funds, and perhaps the only thing they need is just one or two adjustments. For example, the market which I mentioned there, the Gong markets, we are helping them do the solar assessment and something maybe around e-mobility. In another market, we are supporting the waste management and water management. We're just helping them be able to tap water from their roofs. And the other one, we are looking at how can we also embed waste. So there are also opportunities not just to start a greenfield project, but to also look at the existing market and see how smart can we make them. Now let's come to the issue of resources. The Rockefeller Foundation, we have just put in some little investments, about 1.5 million, that is going to support one smart markets and other components of other markets. And we also, leveraging funding from other partners. We compare this very well, and I'm sorry, the amount is in Kenya shillings, but on average, some of these infrastructure projects can be, can cost quite a bit. So we are talking about the range of $2.1 million to something like even $7 million for one market, which is pretty large. So for the Naivasha market, fish market, which is going to be a pilot around smart markets. We're not just looking at the building itself, the infrastructure can be good, but we're also looking at other metrics. I think the first speaker did talk about the 4 M's. So here we're also very keen on measurements in terms of the amount of organic waste that we can be able to recycle from the market, the solid waste management, the amount of water that we can save, the jobs that can be created by such markets. And something very interesting, in some of the African markets, even the bathrooms, the restrooms for for the shoppers are not there. The fact that you can also be able to give access to clean bathrooms for even women, I think that's a plus. We're also looking at the economic impact. So I will not go into all those numbers, but we do see opportunities for job creation, and we also do see opportunities for other households within. We see the opportunities for other households to also tap into the solar energy, and we also see food loss that we hope that we can also be able to reduce the losses. I'll not go to too much details, but overall, we think that the smart markets have the opportunity to reach, I would say, something like 2 million people, and then also secure more nutritious foods within the markets. Eventually, our theory of change is that if you can also reduce the losses at the market, then that could have maybe potentially some impact in pricing, and so many of the other metrics that we are looking at. So for me, the key takeaway for the audience is that what we have found, for you to be successful, and especially when you're working in a market where you're looking at the public sector market, I think partnership is going to be key. Partnership with the private sector and partnership with the county government. And then the governance structure has to be envisioned right. The market management committees in Kenya, in Africa, they can be very powerful, and just looking for ways in which we can facilitate and understand the governance structure and strengthen them. There is also a lot of interest in private investment in markets. And for example, in some of the counties, they are asking us to help us they're asking us to help them come up with the private sector investment plans. So overall, we do believe that the smart markets can also give us the opportunity to bring in sustainable cyclical business models, and also bring employment. So as I finish, I can say that I think as we are gearing towards the Food System Summit, we cannot afford to ignore the food markets. The open food markets are going to be critical. So hopefully at another time I can come back with a real market. But for now, that's what we have as the Rockefeller Foundation. And thank you so much for taking time to listen to me.
Thank you very much, Betty, for your contribution. And now we have more than 4 million people watching our dialogue live stream. And many people have also left some remarks in the chat box. Thank you very much. And I have chosen 2 questions that are most asked and pose them to our speakers. First question is, we focus on wet markets because they are a hub of our food systems, but there is very complex relationships around the wet markets. So in the whole process, who should be the one to coordinate all stakeholders? In the commercial, food security and agricultural issues. Some efforts might overlap with each other, but who should lead the way to coordinate and manage the wet markets. The second question has already been answered by Richard in the chat box, but I will pose the questions to other speakers too. Richard has said that we should incentivize shoppers and vendors. For example, we should promote meatless Mondays. But more specifically, how to reward the shoppers and vendors to change for a better market. And those are our questions. And please feel free to answer.
Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you for those very good and actually complicated questions. In terms of who leads the way, I really would like to sort of echo Betty Cabara's insistence upon partnership. I think what we have found throughout the world is that markets can be owned and managed and governed privately. They can be owned, managed, and governed publicly. And they also cannot be owned or managed or governed by anyone with absolutely no organization. And they work in different settings depending upon the context. However, they work best when they are managed and governed. And there is no single way to do this, to reinvent these ancient assemblies of competing vendors. But I do think that the great success in the recent revival of public markets has been when civil society plays a major role in curating, much like an artist curates different components. It takes some very complex governance and management to bring all of the groups together. And I think that civil society plays an important role, but in partnership, as Betty described, in partnership with the private sector and the public sector. And while that may sound chaotic, because it can be, I think this is why the importance of having a theory of change, of having shared vision of what the market can do to fulfill a public goal is what can keep it together. But it is not just you design it and then it runs itself. It requires constant, transparent caring for that vision.
Richard, if I could just add, every market, I think Betty talked about this, every market is different. It's very site specific. And what is good for one market may not be good for another market. But you know, what HealthBridge has done in Hanoi is look at a system of the markets, all 300 of them, and begin to, you know, look at this public-private partnership model for the system, and then it plays out differently in each local market.
And if I can follow on with that, Huey said, okay, if I jump in, because I do think that this idea of systems is appropriate for this conversation, is that we spend much of our professional public market practitioner lives working on perfecting a specific market, much as Betty is trying to launch that perfect market, and trying to be smart about them. I think the opportunity now is that we are recognizing that there are systems of markets. There's an ecosystem where the markets may compete for shoppers, they may compete for vendors, but more importantly, we need to step back and look at the municipal territories of markets and see how public policy affects them, how design affects them, and in particularly how the nuts and bolts of waste management and trash and toilets and flooding provides dignity for shoppers, but it is stepping back and looking at the system.
Thank you, Richard 和 Steve 的评论。
Thank you, Richard and Stefan, for answering our questions. Do you have anything to add, Ms. Ha?
I'm just No, I just agree with Steve and Richard. Yeah, just go ahead.
Shui, I did not respond to the question about incentives. I don't know if that is helpful for me to elaborate, or should we move on?
Just elaborate a little bit more.
Okay, I will very quickly. There is a very successful program in the United States that rewards shoppers who are poor, who are low income, who come to the market, whether they are seniors or mothers with children, who are on public assistance, who are part of the cash transfer economy. And when they spend, I'll use US dollars, $10 to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables, they get rewarded by being given an additional $10 to purchase more fresh fruits and vegetables. And this kind of conditional cash transfer recognizes that the market is a place that we minimize or mitigate the risk it takes to participate. And what I mean by that is that the vendor's risk is minimized because the vendor sits next to competing vendors. And while they may compete, by being together, they attract more shoppers. And for the vulnerable consumer whose nutrition and health is in question, they are rewarded by coming to the market with these kinds of public and philanthropically funded incentive campaigns. And while this has been spearheaded in the United States, it is ultimately a very low-tech strategy that works as well in the global South as it does, say, in China, where you're using WeChat to pay. So it can be put on phones as well as be used with paper.
好，那让我再次感谢前面所有嘉宾的精彩演讲。
So thank you for all your contributions. And now I'd like to propose that we take a virtual group photo. Please switch on your webcams if it is convenient, and I will take a screenshot. So please switch on your webcams and I will take a screenshot. Thank you. Okay, it's done. And now we can have a 2-minute break before going on to our next topic, which is the panel discussion. And I will make this slides full screen and you can have a look at them. Now enjoy your break.
那么接下来我就把时间交给我的同事陆月。
And now, next on our agenda is the panel discussion, and I will pass it on to my colleague Cindy, who will be the moderator.
好的，谢谢慧宇。大家好，我叫郑如月，目前是粮食基金的项目官员，同时参与了外菜市场手册的编写工作，非常荣幸能够作为本次。
Today I'm very happy
Hi everyone, my name is
to
Cindy.
be able to moderate the panel discussion. Can you see the screen?
OK，
We have invited 11 experts from different backgrounds, different fields, and different time zones. They will talk about their practices and research in the wet market. They will talk about their insights about the wet market. This panel discussion will last for 70 minutes. First, we will highlight the undervalue of wet markets, analyze challenges faced by the wet markets, and propose strategies to build a wet market in China. We will come up with some solutions for the Chinese wet markets. We have three parts. First, we will have an introduction session for the panelists, and then we will move on to the discussion. And then if you have any questions about the discussion, you can leave your questions in the chat box. And at the end of this panel discussion, we will have some time for questions. So these are the panelists for today's discussion. We introduce themselves one by one. So please first introduce about yourself and how you are related or relevant to the wet markets. Also talk a little bit about why you care about the wet markets. I hope that the audience can see your face, so I will stop the screen sharing. So I'm very delighted to have invited Mr. 朱大洲 from Institute of Food and Nutrition Development, Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. We're happy to be here to talk about the wet market in China. After COVID-19, many outbreaks of the COVID-19 pandemic cluster in the wet markets. For example, in China, in Beijing, there was an outbreak of COVID-19 in a wet market. So people are very concerned about the wet markets. We took a look at food safety in the past when we are dealing with the wet markets. In terms of regulation, we tend to build supermarkets because they are better regulated from supply to consumption. It is better organized and regulated. But after the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a lot more discussions about the development of the wet market in China. A lot of discussion center on the cost of the wet markets. Vendors focus on the cost of the wet markets. One advantage for the wet market is that it has very low rental fees. Because of its low rental fees, it has advantages in selling their products when compared to online shopping and community group buying. I think In the future, we should build the wet market into one that will benefit the people, the residents living around the markets. Now in China, the markets are managed by investors, and these markets will benefit these investors. In the future, I think like new energy vehicles, the government is building a lot of these charging stations. So I think the government can play a similar role in developing the wet markets. For example, around some communities, we should build one wet market so that the senior citizens can buy their daily necessities in these wet markets. So the government should take into consideration these projects, and this should be something that they should be evaluated with. So when it comes to who will be running this wet market in China, some wet markets are organized or managed by the watchdogs in China, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. But because of different levels of development, we have imbalanced development of the wet markets in China. For example, in Shanghai, they are doing a great job in developing the wet markets. The wet markets in Shanghai are very regulated and can benefit the residents around the markets, because the governments can invest a lot of money in building the wet markets. So I think this is something that we should build on. So this is pretty much about my introduction. The next speaker and the next two speakers are from Zhejiang. The next speaker is Gu Xiaomin, Director of Beilin District Health Bureau. I think Mr. Gu can talk a little bit about the experiences in your districts. So can you hear me? Yes, yes. Hello. I am Gu Xiaoming, Deputy Director of Beilin District Health Bureau from Ningbo, Zhejiang Province. Very happy to be here to join the panel discussion. Health authorities aim to improve the health of residents, to improve their nutrition, their food. So the development of the wet markets is relevant to the health of the residents. I just got to learn about these wet markets recently, but I actually have some experience in transforming the wet markets. Why? Because like the speakers just said, I think the government attaches great importance to the development of the wet markets. Since 2008, the government has invested 100 million yuan in developing the governance and management of local wet markets. So we have been improving the software and infrastructure of the wet market. Second, since last year, we've been working with Zhejiang University and Professor Yang Min to work on the wet markets. We want to integrate the elements of health and nutrition into the development of the wet markets. We want to communicate and spread nutrition and health knowledge to our residents online and offline, so that our consumers can learn more about health and nutrition. We also noticed that in recent years, we have faced some health problems. In terms of how to prevent chronic and non-communicable diseases, we think that we need to control the intake of food. So we need to focus on the wet markets as the source of the food. So we extend our public policies to the wet markets. And third, we came up with the concept of future community. I think the wet market is a paradigm for this transformation. How can we achieve the smooth integration of the wet market and community? We want to focus on building the wet market in order to build a smart community. So that's pretty much about my introduction. Thank you. And today we are very happy to have Professor Yang Min here. We want to know more about this health and nutrition knowledge. Hello, distinguished guests. Good evening. Very happy to be able to join the panel discussion tonight. I am Yang Min from Zhejiang University School of Public Health. I focus on the intervention of obesity and chronic diseases. Since 2008, with the support of Zhejiang University, we have built a team to implement some nutrition, innovation, and technology programs. The smart wet markets was built in 2012 with the help of the community committee and the local government. That was a smart wet market. It was also a pilot program. Just like Dr. Gu said, we want to focus on health. We want to focus on the wet market as the pilot program so that we can provide more nutritious and safe, healthy food. We take into consideration the intervention of chronic diseases in the communities. And after that, we found that the development of the wet market is not just about preventing these chronic diseases. It covers a wide range of issues, including stakeholder engagement. The wet market also faces a lot of challenges, socially, politically, and economically. Director Gu had just said, the markets was owned and managed by investors. If we cannot solve the challenges at the bottom of the system, for example, the wet markets was undermined or challenged by the online markets and other similar marketplaces. The prices in the wet markets are not so competitive to the online markets. And if it cannot match with the consumption habits with the residents, then the wet markets will face more challenges. So to develop the wet markets, we not only need health experts, but we also need public policymakers. That is, we need to engage multiple stakeholders. So that's the reason why I'm here. I want to hear more perspectives about the wet markets. Thank you.
So
next, I will invite two foreign experts to shed light on the wet markets. Next, I will invite Nazia Habib from Resilience and Sustainable Development Program of University of Cambridge.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And the organizers, thank you so much for inviting. Already this has been one of the highlights of my day, hearing these experts and the case studies. So the first question is, why do I care? Because it's so important, as all the experts has already suggested, that this wet market is core to the tradition and many of the culture of the economy where we belong to, whether it's Canada, Kenya, or China. And born and raised in Bangladesh, I myself has benefited tremendously from wet market, not only for the purpose of food and nutrition, but for social engagements. I recall my favorite days walking around Bengali wet market, finding the best street food and just chowing down with friends. And I think the reality of modern society is becoming so virtual that it almost a part of me that we need to reconfigure the wet markets to restore and the fabrics of our society. And youth are the big part of our future. So for youth, the wet markets are actually quite an interesting engagement to the local supply chain, because that's where you get to find the food that comes from your own country and from the region, and appreciate the seasonal variety that brings out in the wet markets. So although there is the definition has already been identified, I just want to underscore that wet market reform, a lot of the literatures that comes out, and this is where I come in as what I do. I am an academic from the University of Cambridge. I specialize in applied policy system, and my research team and I, we are a group of academics and practitioners stemming from science departments such as engineering, physics, and medical science to social sciences, because we blend methodologies from science to social sciences to highlight some of the complexity that were highlighted by my previous speaker as to how do you engage local understanding of the value of wet market with the commercial value that we understand what money is, to the public value is what the government should be doing for its people. And these three understanding of value is in conflict with each other unless and until we understand how the dynamics actually work out and creates opportunities for each other. So shared understanding is about shared risk management. And I think where China is today with the pandemic and the unfortunate labeling of wet market as one of the so-called or alleged originator of the virus is actually an unfortunate reality of pressure down price that comes down on the head of the smallholders who are part of the wet market. And this is we have seen since the literatures on China has been very much focused on liberalization of its market and talking about momentum 2004 when China has joined the World Trade Organization that created the propulsion of taking out some of the wet markets which were previously owned by the government into the hand of the private owners. Hence, the director's concern is that how do you go about creating wet market reform with the current organizational mandates, which are very much driven by market orientation. So I think for me, that's about it, where I get excited to join this event, and I'm looking forward to further conversation.
好的，非常非常感谢 Nazia 的一个分享，也是很同意他说到的一些点。那我们
So thank you so much, Nazia Habib. Thank you for your inspiring sharing. And next, I will invite Anne Palmer from Johns Hopkins University. Can you say hi to everyone?
Yeah. Okay.
Sure, Cindy. Okay, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm really glad I could join you all. So I work with food policy councils in the United States, and a lot of those food policy councils are promoting local marketplaces, including what we would, farmers markets, what Richard was describing, what market type situations. And why do I care about them? And I think oftentimes these venues are underappreciated by governments and sometimes even their own communities. Food is taken for granted. I think in the US, we see the government sort of want the marketplace to solve a lot of the food-related problems without any intervention, which, as we saw during COVID, was a disaster. It really did require a lot of mobilization by various sectors to get things moving. And we saw a lot of councils doing that. So I think wet markets, when I think about like what is the potential here and why should we be focused on them, is that if we want them to create a certain outcome, say we want stronger economic development in our local communities, we want producers to have different places to sell, we want citizens to have places to buy foods that are healthy and being developed locally and produced locally. If we want those outcomes, we have to design the markets to create them that way. And so I think this is an opportunity, in my opinion, to rethink what we like about the wet markets, what we want to see more of, and what do we want to see change to get a better outcome for our communities. And that's something that I think we would share that same sentiment in the US, is that we have to think about, rethink how we're doing these types of interventions to get what we want from them. And I'll stop there.
好的，谢谢 Anne。那接下来我们邀请到的嘉宾，他的背景更加的不一样。
So next, I'm going to invite an expert with a diversified background. She's Liu Wei from Tsinghua University Urban Planning and Design Institute. So thank you for your invitation. I'm from Beijing Tsinghua Tongheng Urban Planning and Design Institute. I'm responsible for urban planning. So mainly, my work focuses on the community level. So basically, for everyone, urban renovation is closely related to everybody's daily lives. Although not everyone has a clear understanding what it is, but when you mention urban planning to those citizens, they might not understand the policy, but they do care about what really matters to them in terms of their everyday lives. So actually, from my perspective, wet markets are important. So government has been paying attention to build wet markets so that citizens can enjoy a better living environment. And now everybody is talking about to build a livable, comfortable living circle, to have a better space for a comfortable life. The government has been working on this. And just now, from the sharing, I've heard about the different features provided by the wet markets and some features related to social innovation. And from my perspective, every sector can offer their contribution in terms of their different background and expertise.
比如说，告诉咱们这个宁波北仑这边已经开始研究通过智
So
慧
in
的这个
Ningbo,
菜市场，然后去解决这个居民这个
certain projects have been carried out to research on what impact will be brought to the citizens
那么，所以实际上我自己的感觉呢，就是
after the building of wet markets.
菜市场遇到了什么这个就
So
是好
when
像
it comes to the challenges faced by wet market, I hold a positive attitude because I think solving these challenges actually depend on the actions of different parties because different parties care about different aspects of the problem or different interests.
给菜市场附加了不同的价值的时候，那其实我
So
们很难强
when these parties
价值这个东西对更高的
have given their understanding
那其实我们
of the wet markets,
这个社会发展阶段以及
so
你
we must accommodate these people's interests and demands.
在他
Only
的
by
权利
doing so can we
比如说，当我们的社
come
会
up
问
with better plans
能够吃到干净的食物，解决这个干净的
to
这种
offer everyone with safe and nutritious food and clean drinking water.
解决这个基本公共服务的政府来说不太现实。但是如果可能
The government cannot accommodate needs from everyone, but actually in the private sector, certain organizations can make their contributions. In first-tier cities of Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou,
这个居民已经不能够接受了，他需要的是我更
so
健康。
the citizens are not actually satisfied with the government only solving problems related to their basic necessities. And actually, citizens aspire for a higher living standards. So
这种不同的角色来
today's dialogue is an important occasion to raise awareness of different walks of life so that different sectors can offer their contributions.
他的总结说，不同群体给菜市场赋予了不同价值，我觉得这个总结很好。
So just now, I highly agree with Ms. Liu Wei. So next, I will invite Director Xiao on the problem of how wet markets can endow wet markets with greater values. So I focus on urban planning from the perspective of renovations.
一个城市更新以及它的可持续运营管理。那在城市片区里面最集中的，我们就会遇到大量的老旧菜市
So
场。
in some sectors or in some areas of the city, we have encountered some projects in terms of market renovations.
之外呢，它确实也承载了很多社区里面的社交。
So besides offering citizens with healthy food, actually markets are closely related to our everyday life. So in modern city of China,
它这样的一些独特性，那城市更新在这个里面呢，正是推动了这些。
markets are actually unique because it has been a special part of people's lives.
在中国
So today what I want to talk about is that we can make the most of urban renovation to promote the better building of wet markets. Actually, in this process, different stakeholders, including real estate developers, can join this process. And they can work with NGOs and government departments to promote the building of wet markets. And actually, this cooperative mechanism reflect the interests of different stakeholders. At the same time, it is beneficial for advancing the urban renovation projects. And actually, this has given another meaning to urban renovation. And in this sector, we also take into considerations the diversity of food and different other aspects to elevate the concept of wet markets to a higher level. Today is a very special occasion because we have all these experts, teachers gather here to talk about this issue. On the one hand, we can use the opportunity of urban renovations to promote this process. And actually, we can make more contributions. A design of sustainable commercial models is actually important to promote this process. Because the sustainability of wet markets is indeed important. So I wonder if you can give the opportunities of sharing to other experts.
我想听一听，你们这样的一个领域能给菜市场的价值给予怎么样的一个更好的落地呢？
Now, next speaker will be Mr. Xu Wei, founder of the Plus 86 China Food Design Association. Hi, everyone. Actually, we started as designers, and the reason why we came to the food area and food-related problems is that we want to make our work more colorful, and we think that when we need to change people's behaviors, we must change their concepts and thoughts first. And we have done a lot of work to make designers into this new field, to bring about more impact and to come up with new thoughts in this field. And we have also developed some designs about wet markets in Shanghai and Hangzhou and other cities. Wet markets in Shanghai are doing a really good job because the municipal government is focusing on quality and regulations about pricing and the pricing of agricultural produce. So the wet markets can really benefit vendors and consumers in the communities in Shanghai. Actually, most of the vendors are elderly couples, which is a commonplace in China, and wet markets actually are managed by really powerful officials and powerful institutions may use some anti-competitive measures to take advantage. For example, taking up more public resources without paying for them. This behavior can be tolerated if it was carried out by a large institution, but it will be punished if it is carried out by individual vendors. So I think the core issue of wet markets is equality, how to protect the rights of the vulnerable group. And the moderator says, I agree with you. Carry on. In order to protect the vulnerable groups, the powerful groups should not should not exploit their rights. I saw a report that a real estate market manager said he didn't fulfill his goals last year, and he needed to improve his performance next year, which means he will increase the price of the property. It is an analogy that we can use on the wet markets. The moderator says the pricing of produce is a very sensitive topic, and Mr. Chi Wei says prices cannot be brought up very casually. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chi Wei. And well, next up is Peggy Chen, the founder of Grassroots Pantry.
Everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation. Dialing in from Hong Kong. I'm a chef and restaurateur by trade. So in 2012, we opened a restaurant here that pushes for plant-based dining and also to raise awareness of the inequities of our food system. Now, why am I in this conversation? Well, first and foremost, we contributed to the wet market handbook, but very importantly is that Grassroots Pantry as our restaurant, a small social enterprise, would not have been successful without our local market. So within that same year in 2012, there was a farmers market that launched called Islandese Market. And the whole idea, it was one of the first back then in Hong Kong where they integrated farmers, local farmers, as well as small artisan food service or small artisan food makers, as well as pop-up restaurants into that space. And every Sunday they would be there. And why I talk about this is because within that micro space of relationships, and I know all the experts here are talking a lot about the external benefits and the environmental and social benefits and the health benefits of integrating wet markets into their society, but there are a lot of micro benefits that occur as well when a chef is in the same space as a farmer, which actually you might think that that's normal, but it actually very often farmers don't ever meet the chef, and the chef never knows where their food comes from. So within that micro space, a lot of relationship is built throughout that relationship. And so what I'd love to see with wet markets in the future is that they would integrate principles of farmers market, where it's a space for small businesses to actually test the ground, to maybe launch an artisanal product, to test a restaurant pop-up, to really play around with concepts where the risk is lower, where actually you're also building a lot of relationships. A lot of relationships we built back 10 years ago are still being used right now, where we're helping aggregate their voices, the farmers' voices, and at the same time, it's a fantastic platform to really be able to amplify and deepen the messages of biodiversity, food security, and food safety for all. So as you know, the concept of celebrity chefs, they're really great amplifiers for these messages if we know how to use them well. So thank you so much for having me joined.
好的，谢谢 Peggy 你的分享，我觉得很不一样。
Thank you, Peggy Chen, for your sharing, and I think it is a really an unusual experience and a very pleasant one to hear from a chef. And now let's welcome Wang Dani, the founder and CEO of Impact Travel Beijing. Hi everyone, my name is Dani and I am the founder and CEO of Impact Travel Beijing. As far as I'm concerned, what we do might not be very relatable to today's topic because our work is related to travel. But last year, we initiated a new project called City Hunters. What we do is we recruit many young people in different cities and engage them in some activities that are environmental friendly. And what surprised us was that young people in the first tier or in inland cities in China have found places like open air markets. And these young people wanted to find topics related to organic foods, and they have focused on wet markets. And I think this also reflected of the fact that the young people do not know much about our traditional wet markets. Wet markets not only sell foods, they are also an important part when we travel in different cities that we can explore to learn about the geological features of the local community. We can learn the food culture and cuisine culture and cooking methods through wet markets of different cities. So I think open air markets are very important in urban life, especially among young people. It is like a bridge, a connection between young people and local culture. Another thing I want to say is that I've seen that in some cities, there have been farmers markets activities which can benefit suburban markets and small-scale agriculture practitioners to amplify their conversations. This is a future trend, I think. And thank you, Danny, for your thoughts, and you have provided with us a lot of hopes for the future. And now let's welcome Mr. Richard McCarthy, board member of Slow Food International. Hi, Richard. Can you hear me? Hi, Richard.
Hello. Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
I would like to invite you to tell something about your future work and some detailed discussion. So please introduce yourself first.
Yes, I will. Thank you. Thank you so much for including me. My name is Richard McCarthy. I am on the International Executive Committee for Slow Food, and I work with markets around the world. I am a market evangelist and have, in particular, really enjoyed the insights that different players in the economy, whether from the perspective of chef or public health or urban planning, see the value of this ancient mechanism of markets which assemble competing vendors in an orderly, sometimes not overly orderly, but an orderly place, is something that gives a great deal of value to the quality of life. And these benefits are felt whether we are interested in building social capital and the bridge building that I think Danny just spoke about, social capital, financial capital for the vendors. And in particular, we see with the rise of farmers markets, the benefit directly to the farmers who engage in this direct marketing mechanism, in part because they increase their profitability, but mostly because the direct contact with consumers means that they learn, they benefit, and they develop credible insights into what consumers are looking for. They educate consumers, because of course, those of us who live in cities have no clue what is in season, when, and how does it get to market. But the benefits are felt beyond social capital impact, financial capital impact, but also the human capital impact. And I think this discussion has been risen to a great sense of urgency because of the vulnerable state of our human capital. The public health crisis of 2020 has demonstrated just how precarious these public gatherings are, for one, But I think to watch what has occurred throughout markets all over the planet, to respond so creatively, so quickly, to make them safer places with social distancing within public spaces, does speak to why markets are worth investing in. And they're worth investing in because they are ancient mechanisms that are still here, but more importantly, because they can lead a pathway to greater transformation of our relationships between our individual relationship with food and our relationships within regions to cultivate healthier people and healthier economies. So maybe I'll stop there. Yeah.
好，那其实我们有收集到观众。
And we have collected some questions from the audience, and I want to post them to every speaker, and feel free to answer them if you would like to. One of the audience wanted to know that
in terms of the
how will the wet markets influence the behaviors of the young people in the future, and how should we react to this kind of behavior change? For example, the young people in China are working longer hours. Very long
they don't have time to visit these wet markets, the farmer markets, and even if they want to, when they get out of work, these farmers markets, the wet markets are closed. So what are the changes facing the wet markets? So if you want to answer this question, please raise your hand.
I'll just jump in if you don't mind. Hi. Yes. I mean, we're looking at it from a consumer and purchasing perspective. Yes, the way that we see wet markets in the future, we should be really looking at how can we support and how can we adapt to these changes. Yes, we are busier nowadays, but there are ways that we can actually adapt to the operations, such as knowing when their operation hours are, or working with the farmers in terms of when they would actually be there, knowing their schedules. All of these matter. And I think that there are ways to actually prepare food that can help or allow you to prepare beforehand and purchase beforehand. So I don't think that is actually a real barrier in a way. So maybe I'll just pass on to someone else to continue. Yeah.
好的，其他嘉宾还有什么回应吗？
So any comments?
在年轻群体中怎么样把
How? Oh, okay, Richard.
I'll be very, very brief. You are absolutely correct that the time constraints for busy younger people is real. I think this is an opportunity for markets, for wet markets that are trusted intermediaries. Now that raises the question, are they trusted intermediaries? But if they are trusted intermediaries, they can engineer food box deliveries, subscriptions, online ordering as an extension of the market. This is very complicated, and in places where the distances are great, it is even more complicated. But I certainly look to Japan as being one of the places that has really excelled in this kind of consumer-friendly, community-supported agriculture shipping box system. And I think there's much to learn there.
其他嘉宾还有补充吗？
So any other comments from other speakers? So Danny.
之后是 Nazia。
刚刚 Richard 他说的其实是我有想到，那我可以再说一个别的，就是我觉得我自己觉得说不能为了要去保护菜市场而忽略现在年轻人的这样的。
We cannot overlook these consumption habits just for the sake of developing the wet markets, including their 996 schedule. You cannot protect the markets just for the sake of the protection. I think one good way is that on weekends, on vacations, many young people actually willing to use to the farms to experience life there. They want to know the life cycle of this food they eat. So I think this is important for our discussion for food sustainable transformation. We need to make young people have the opportunity to get exposed to these environments where their food is grown, so that they can really get a better understanding of these environments of the organic food. So thank you, Danny. I see Anne raise her hand. So, Annie?
I was just going to add something about, you were talking about the, what kind of, we haven't talked much about the production practices of farmers and how would we promote those, and can this be a place where we would promote environmentally friendly farming practices? Richard asked the question, are they trusted sources? Is there a way to incentivize producers that they would be able to sell product that would identify certain attributes to that product? So say, I don't know, I'll say organic as an example. I'm not suggesting that at all, but just like, is there some kind of a branding that could be offered to producers who are going above and beyond normal production methods, and that those sellers would also have a way of promoting those products as a higher quality good. So in some cases, like in the States, they'll have farmers markets that are only allowing products that have been grown by the seller. So you can make, restrict markets to have them be promoting products that have a certain level of production quality. So another way to sort of distinguish between markets and what you would find in a supermarket.
Azia, go ahead.
I want to add to the experts what they have shared, the view of the youth in the marketplace. And I think youth, especially in the Chinese context, should become part of the policy design process as we are thinking about wet market reform. And the question is actually very, very critical, because if the youth are the future consumer, we need to reform the market with the view of youth being able to consume. So as Richard pointed out, that's one of the innovations. Also, timing is something interesting, and China has already done it. It has for generations. It's a nighttime market. So night markets are nothing new, but what is new into this is insecurity, the physical insecurity that it is for the consumers to be there in the dead of the night and being able to enjoy the night markets. So this is where the future of a GPS-based security system that can allow more visibility on identifying the trust, not only just in the product itself, but in the physical presence of youth in the market would be something that I would add to the conversation that's going on.
好的，好的，谢谢子叶的分享。那其实
Thank you, Danny. And another question of concern about community group buying and corresponding applications. What impacts will they have on the web markets? Because many young people are buying their food online. I want to give the floor to Mr. Shi Wei for his observations. These online buying applications can provide convenience, but they are for commercial use. Of course, they are for profits. So this will increase the cost of the food. Well, at first glance, it might seem that it is reducing cost, but at the end, it is increasing because it is for commercial use. So in the longer term, it will increase the cost. It will not solve the fundamental problem. So any comments from other speakers about this new model of buying food? whether it will twist the value of the physical markets. Or maybe Director Gu, can you talk a little bit about the transformation of the local wet markets? What impacts do they have on your markets, and how do you solve these impacts? Our projects funded by the government. From our projects, the e-commerce is dealt a heavy blow to the wet market, but actually it's not so serious.
这部分的人可能也对传统的市场有一定的分流，但是我们北人看起来
，e-commerce might attract young people, but for the traditional wet markets in Beiliu districts, it has maintained its function and is doing very well. Thank you.
还有关于这个新型的社区团购模式买菜。
So, any comments about this new community buying thing?
在于我们线上进行购买支付怎么更好的线上模式对于
any foreign guests to talk a little bit about this?
Could you rephrase the question a little bit?
好的，我更想问到大家是一个关于线上的一个支付形式，买菜形式。我们的新的年轻人消费群体。
Whether this online buying behavior from
或者把这样的挑战化成一个机遇。
The young people, or to put it other way, how can we use the opportunities presented by the online buying thing used by young people to develop our web markets?
结合它形成一个线上线下两种都可以的一个模式呢？
Or should we build an online or offline market?
我来说一下。
好的。
我又在继续说这个问题啊，我觉得就是现在有很多的。
I will add a few things.
比如说像什么健康宝，比如说我们的疫情。
We have many online applications in China. For example, 健康宝, an application built by Alibaba. Of course, on this application, you have advertising.
我觉得
you have sponsorship from the government. These applications are used in public settings, but it is actually not just for private use.
挺想超楠，你可以发言。你说。
我们作为这个社区或者是片区的运营商，就是辅助政府来做这个片区的基础治理工作的时候，就
we work with the government in providing community governance services. Actually, e-commerce and logistics are the last stretch of our work. When we're dealing with the package, we think young people, first, they don't have time. Second, they don't know how to cook. So I think community buying can be the last stretch for the young people to live their life. They can use this online buying community, these online group buying applications to lead an easier life. We can work with relevant parties to promote these applications. And for old people, it is the same because it is not so convenient for them to climb up the stairs and go down the stairs. And then if we have these online buying applications, we can deliver these food or other packages to the doorstep of the senior people. So that saves a lot of trouble. So I think online buying applications can work with the local web markets to provide better services. So this is what we learn in our practice. I think non-profit organizations and communities can also join these online buying applications and leverage these online applications.
Yeah, hello. So again, I will add to the conversation is that where the challenge lies with the online buying in the youth is the price point. When you add in the service fee that's added by the private agencies who are developing the apps are the one who, and we see it in the UK very much so, between Eat and Deliveroo, two online service providers, they take out almost 20 to 30% out of the commissioning restaurants when they distribute their food. So from the point of view of China, as it has a very interesting models between municipalities where these wet markets are, some are owned by private, some are owned by the state-owned enterprise. However, both models are driven by profit margins to be measured as a success. We have also seen in pictures that some of the wet markets infrastructure is not well enough. So that goes to tell you that when there that level of power inequality within the system, how the current markets are running, just by adding another layer of service delivery to address another a growing population base will not solve the problem. It will further, in some extent, will diminish the power of the producers that they have on the product as they sell it in person with the consumers where they get to negotiate. So the point that I think we should explore the extent to which you could create some kind of price ceiling or some kind of pricing cushion to ensure that the smallholder farmers or the shopkeepers who are curating this food in the small markets are not going to be taken for a ride by these app delivery private companies for the benefit of reaching more and wider range of customers. And this is a trade-off that it's nothing new. It's been out there in the literatures of informal economics for over 30 years, and yet we are almost forgetting the cost that it takes to create value for wider population versus the value of the stakeholders, i.e. the profit margin. Thank you.
好的，谢谢。刚刚我们 Richard 也在聊天框里有一些非常精彩的发言，那我们可以邀请工作人员也进行一些翻译。那我们只剩下最后的4分钟了。
So we have only 4 minutes left. And just now we have very fruitful and inspiring sharing. So I believe that the audience will have great harvest from your sharing. So at last, I would like to invite other guests to discuss about what we will do in the future to promote the building of wet markets. So we'll start from Richard. So now we will start from Richard.
I guess if I could lastly say that I shared some of the work of the Teburu Journal in Japan, which provides a subscription to a magazine, but when you receive your magazine, your publication, it includes a box of food. And I think that this provides an insight into the opportunity for the markets to be useful tools that have benefits far beyond just food access. This is where tourism and food security and economic development all collide, but it collides when the market is managed well with a larger purpose, a public purpose. And that is why the wet markets are and can be transformative. So I really applaud this conversation.
好的，谢谢 Richard。
So thank you, Richard.
你有没有什么最后的想要跟大家分享的点呢？以及希望后期我们有怎么样的合作
Would you like to share some thoughts on our future work to implement the wet markets?
他可能不在，那我们先到 Peggy。
Then we'll start from Peggy.
Were you wanting me to talk? Sorry.
Oh.
I think it's I was calling Peggy.
Danny. Oh.
Sorry. Peggy, 你可以和我们分享一下。
Peggy, would you like to share with us the future work we can do?
Yeah, I mean, I echo everyone's sentiments, especially the point of large market players taking up a huge commission out of the existing relationships between farmer and consumer. And I think that because of this relationship that we have exacerbated, how we can actually move forward is to shorten the supply chain and really work direct with our farmers. And so the relationship that we have always known working in silos in the field is that of a buyer and seller relationship, and that needs to change because once we cultivate shared wisdom, shared responsibility, then we create a community, and communities help each other and they give aid to each other. And I think that that's what we are foreseeing when we're talking about wet markets and talking about the future of wet markets here. So thank you for having me again.
好的，谢谢 Peggy， 你今天能够花时间来我们的现场。那刚刚
Thank you so much for attending today's dialogue. So next, I would like to invite Anne to share with us your thoughts.
So I think my one sentence would be that we should think creatively about how to use policy to incentivize the purchase of healthy food, for producers to experiment and apply more sustainable production methods, and for cities to and other locales to consider wet markets as an asset in their community, and what sort of policies do they need to have in place to encourage those venues to exist?
好的，那我们其实已经超时1分钟了。那我想最后留一个机会，有任何一个嘉宾还想给到观众最后一个结束语吗？如果没有的话，那我把会场，好的，慧宇说我们还可以有时间，那我那还是很想听听每个嘉宾的最后的给观众的一个寄语，或者基于我们外菜市场的一个寄语。池伟老师，你有什么想最后补充的吗？
对，经过今天的学习和讨论啊，对，我觉得以一种事件的形式来引起大家的关注啊，然后我觉得就是这种有钱的人，然后就像捐博物馆一样啊，他捐一个菜市场给我们的社区，然后这个菜市场会重新分配这个权利，然后让那个弱势群体拥有更多权利。
对，我们是往更公平的方向发展，是一个非常大胆的，
可以引起别人的关注。
好的，那下面一位是肖楠，
我就介绍到这里。
肖楠，你有最后的补充吗？
我作为好像是唯一的一个企业代表参加，所以我作为企业，我们是非常愿意去参与到这样的公益的事业里面来的，同时担任更多的社会责任。还有另一方面，我刚刚也有提到，就是在我们的示范项目落地的时候呢，可以提供更多公益和商业的平衡设计，包括更多跟政府合作的方式的设计，因为政府它会有多方面的考虑。那么这个是我们作为项目落地方和运营方比较擅长的，我们会在这方面发挥更多的优势，让政府、公众、企业还有我们的公益都能够得到多方的收益。这是我希望未来我能发挥的作用。谢谢大家。
好的，非常感谢。那我们 下一位邀请到刘威所长，希望你最后给大家一些补充吧。
好的。其实我觉得，因为我们研究的是复杂的城市，就是城市它的这个让人着迷的部分，就是因为它的多样性。那我们在城市里去研究菜市场，或者是研究其他任何，我自己个人是认为不应该抛弃这个多样性。我们没有理由去说所有的东西都按一个模式去做，也不可能为城市提供单一的选择。所以我们真正是往可持续、更包容的方向，就是为城市提供更多的可能性。即使是在一个区域，也应该提供多种的这种买菜购物的方式，既可以是线上的，也可以是线下的，既可以是满足不同层次的人，也可以满足来自外来的人群。所以我的建议是，我们在推广这个外菜市场这样的一个项目，其实可以有多种的可能性，在不同的地方，根据这个地方的特征去提供更多元的可能性，这才是更符合城市多样性的本身的一个趋势的。
非常喜欢刘威所长的对于复杂之美的一个阐述。
Thank you for your contribution, Ms. Yu Wei. And now,
可以跟大家在最后补充一两点吗？
I'd like to invite.
Oh, Nazir, would you like to share?
Hi, Nazir.
Hi. Sorry, the data is flaking in my end somehow. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. So my final point will be that from the Chinese context, the political economy around wet market reform is a very important aspect that needs to be taken care of, not only just by looking at innovative solutions, but also the political leaders around the world, how they are framing the narrative of existing wet market. And in Cambridge, we have I started a research program as it calls resilience, and it's ironic that it's the catchphrase to all, but this research program started way before that. Resilience was an important aspect to be introduced. And I think for China's point of view, we should simulate a lot of these ideas in a controlled way, not as talking about doing a control research experiments, but just simulate it just the way we do software programming and identify what are the unintended consequences there may be. Say, for example, after the momentum of 2004 WTO recognition, 80% of the wet markets have become privatized as a force of liberalization. So in other words, there are a lot of momentums right now with the Food System Summit, SDGs, COVID, COP, you name it. We need to figure out which momentum is going to push the wet market reform in which direction and who are the winners and losers without spending time, money, and efforts behind it in large scale. So that'll be my final point, is word of caution before we get all excited of reforming. Thank you.
好的，那Zia给了很多非常积极的一些信号。
Thank you for your insightful approach and suggestions. Next, I would like to invite Professor Yang Ming.
观众们，
好的，谢谢主持人。刚才
So thank you so much. So previously, a guest has mentioned about policy. In June 10th, the State Council has brought out policy to support the building of pilot zone and sustainable wet markets in Zhejiang province. So in this strategic policy, certain points deserve to be mentioned. First, so Zhejiang province should build a livable residential circle. And then the second, we should build a harmonious community. And then we should further advance the even, balanced distribution of income. I think these requirements align with the the standards of the wet markets building because it aims to improve people's living standards. So I hope that in building a pilot zone for sustainable development in Zhejiang province, Zhejiang province can start to be a model for China in terms of building the wet markets. So we are looking forward to see Zhejiang's progress on building the wet markets. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Gu Xiaoming to share. So, in terms of the implementation of wet markets, the approach should be different because it should accommodate interest from both the consumers and other party. First, in terms of consumers, consumers should have access to healthy and nutritious food, and from the perspective of sellers, with policy support, sellers can acquire certain benefits when they are doing businesses. Just now, I've heard that Zhejiang is doing this, so I hope that in the future I can visit Zhejiang one day.
好的，咱们今天谈到这个
Next, I will invite Mr. Zhu Dazhou. Government actually plays a key role in the future building of wet markets. The Chinese government attaches great importance to food security, and the COVID-19 pandemic has also raised public awareness on how we should ensure food security. And at the same time, we should also take into considerations. At the other hand, we should also scale the fruits discussed today and successful cases. We should integrate these successful experiences in our guidebook so that these experiences can be shared to the public. Thank you.
I welcome Danny to say a few words. Thank you. Today we are having the live stream, and many people might be watching us. So in the end, I want to call on everybody to have some action. And we, our institution, which is Impact, and we have called young people to post their own experience. What we want to do is to have a bottom-up method to let the government know that what young people can provide to the culture and to the society, what huge potentials that young people hold. We have suggested that instead of celebrity going restaurants, why not go to local wet markets, look at their styles and layouts, and look at all the agricultural produce on the wet markets. So on this platform where we have more than 80,000 people and audience watching us live stream, I want to call on everybody to have some action to engage everybody in this move. So that will be all. Thank you for your contribution. And we've come to an end of today's panel discussion. And now I give the floor back to Huiyu. Thank you, Cindy. And you have all explored future development of wet markets from all kinds of perspectives. I want to give a big shout out to everyone. Due to time constraints, we have to now move on to the closing remarks and now welcome Mr. Sun Qun, Secretary General of Slow Food, Great China, to talk about his visions about the future of the wet market. Welcome, Mr. Sun Qun.
谢谢欧阳。首先我想要代表国际办事协会对今天这个会议的组织表示衷心的祝贺哈。这个因为我们是在讨论这个 wet market。
So just now, we're talking about the promotion of wet markets, and today's dialogue has been very successful because we have gathered different opinions from different sectors. So we have a very successful dialogue.
我想在回应 Danny 这个刚才的这个
So in response to Annie's sharing, I would like to say that our idea of building wet markets actually originated from the time dating back to the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. Because at that time, we had a discussion. We actually can extract the idea of wet markets so that people can know the significance of its environmental impact and sustainability. So after a year of research, discussion, and organization, we have finally pulled off this event. In promoting the discussion of such a complicated topic, so the organizers has done a great job. So it's been a long time since I met with the organizers last time. But I know that during this time, they have been making progress in promoting this work. I hope that in the future, we can have a closer cooperation in building the wet markets in the future. Just now, in terms of the future work of building the wet markets, I believe that every generation has its own doubts in terms of the development. In the past, we are much worried about industrialization because we thought industrialization would bring us pollution. But now we are faced with the challenges brought by technological advancement. So just now from the sharing, I have received insightful thinking from the guests, because in the future we can counter these challenges with joint efforts from the society. So we should advance this progress while building a more equitable and sustainable society. We should not worry about that young people nowadays do not like markets, because food markets actually represent a very good memories of those young people. They will remind us of the good old days. So I believe that young people can be a good promoters in building a more sustainable food market in the future. So in Suzhou, there is an innovative practice of food market renovation. And last year, we also invited some chefs to cite to make use of those leftover food to create new and delicious dishes. So through this innovative practice, we can build better the markets and make a benefit for everyone. And with certain activities like going to those iconic and innovative wet markets, young people can also raise a louder voice for the public. I believe that with joint efforts, we can do a better job in the future. Thank you, everyone. So, thank you for inspiring sharing. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Jian Yi, President of Good Food Fund and also the core member of the UNFSS-AT2 leadership team. He has been working at the summit to promote food governance and planning, food environment, and other areas. He will talk about how the outcomes of today's dialogue will contribute to follow-up work.
Thank you, Hui Yu, and thank you, Mr. Sun, for your inspiring speeches. And I want to thank everyone who are present here today. And I think this is a really challenging panel discussion to moderate, because all of the speakers are very prominent and they have a lot to say. So thank you, Sandy, and thank you all the panelists, and thank you, Richard, for typing in some summaries and interesting ideas in the chat box. Just now, Mr. Sun said our wet market project. I came back to China in last August, and I was interviewed. Some foreign journalists wanted to interview us on our ideas and thoughts about wet markets in the post-pandemic era. Wet market had the name wet market does not exactly match the concept of wet market in China, because in China there are lots of agricultural produce markets. People don't know what kind of produce markets that the foreign journalists wanted us to close. And secondly, we at Good Food Fund really don't think there is any need to close wet markets for good, but we are very willing to explore any possibility to make the wet market thrive. And thanks to all of your efforts, we have seen how the wet market can go into the future and transform it themselves. We have started the wet market project bearing in mind that we are not trying to dig up some very ancient old concept. What we have in mind is actually to make the wet markets more relevant and adapt to the future. How do we find its relevance and adaptability of wet markets? This is our job. For example, when I was interviewed by some Western journalists, I made some examples. First, I said if I went to the supermarket, I didn't feel like I went shopping for food, because going to the supermarket does not equal to going to wet markets. So the scenario, the environment of the wet market is very important part of human experience, and it is very hard to analyze it from an economic perspective. Secondly, wet market is a public thing. Wet markets need to retain its public element, and it will have a huge influence on social equity and people's livelihoods. Of course, wet markets are first and foremost a commercial setting for vendors to make a living, but it also has a touch of public element in it. Thirdly, I have been living in Yunnan for the past year during the pandemic, and I have had the opportunity to see how people in Yunnan are returning their biodiversity through their cuisine culture and food culture. I can see that in the city of Dali in Yunnan, how people are sorting out their agricultural produce in their markets, because wet markets and supermarkets have different kind of philosophy when it comes to sorting out the produce. We have known that single breeding production has the highest efficiency, but we have seen that in Yunnan province, it can also provide livelihoods for small-scale farmers. Many of you might have known the good food pledges that we have put forward, and we are willing to explore future possibilities of the wet markets. And I want to add something else. First, when we take a look at the wet markets and how they become a hub in the urban systems, which means the wet market will not only witness what is happening right now, but also connects all kinds of stakeholders in the whole society. Today, we haven't had the opportunity to touch upon farm-related issues, but we mainly focused on wet markets and communities. But wet markets can connect downstreams and upstreams in the supply chain and in the communities, which is very important. Secondly, we regard wet markets as an oasis in the development of healthy food in communities and in urban areas. Why do we call it an oasis? Because in some cities, even in Yunnan province, we have observed some kind of desert in the food-related issues. When we were producing a program called Mom's Kitchen, our chef and our host went to a primary school in the city of Dali, bought all kinds of food that they can get, and cooked them to see how the children reacted to them. And we found that everything we could get was high in calories, oil, and fats and sugar. So in that kind of environment, that equals a desert. So how do we make wet markets the oasis in the urban areas? What we have thought of was that we have the most whole food in the wet markets, unprogressed food. There are far fewer progressed whole foods in the supermarket. And it is very important to know how the whole foods are important to our bodies and our societies. Last but not least, we at the Good Food Fund are having different programs and projects. We have different projects involving chefs. For example, I want to echo what Danny said before, which is encourage people to go to the wet market instead of celebrity restaurants. And we have also put forward the concept of meatless Mondays. Also, it is important to think, how do we extend the public health factors into the wet markets? And also, we have been cooperating and working with NASIA and other partners to find how to leverage the boot camp to engage as many young people as possible to explore the wet markets development in the future. So at the end of the day, we are looking forward to cooperation with all of you from Zhejiang and Cambridge University and everyone. Thank you. And thank you for your summary, Mr. Jian Yi.
我们和 Impact 一起发起的这个菜市场观察家的社群，还有跟全球
So we have initiated the Food Community Observer and other campaign, and these campaigns are joined by many youngsters. I thought that young people nowadays wouldn't go to food markets nowadays, but after seeing all these fruitful sharing, I am touched by the efforts made by young people. And at last, I would like to use 2 or 3 minutes from you guys to receive feedback from you so that we can better promote the projects of wet markets.
同时呢
At the same time,
时间已经很晚
due
了，
to time limit,
呼吁大家现在去逛菜市场。但是呢，我们
I cannot call on everybody to go outside to stroll the food markets, but
课的栏目
I do like to recommend all of you to listen to a podcast. So this podcast focuses on how we are related to the food markets nowadays. So you can scan the QR code to listen to this podcast.
到这里结束了。
So this is the end of today's dialogue. I would like to thank Slow Food China, China Food Design Association, Impact Travel for jointly organizing this dialogue. And in the future, we'll also organize more events to implement more projects. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
谢谢，晚安。
大家晚安。